Chapter 59 Sleep. In the Ma family's residence in Apricot Blossom Alley, the deity in golden armor returned to the courtyard after searching through the entire town. Strangely, however, no one had noticed it as it had walked through the streets and alleys. Ma Kukshuen was squatting outside the door, and after seeing the deity return, a hopeful expression spread across his face. "How is it?" the militarian cultivator from True Marshall Mountain asked. The deity looked extremely dignified and mighty in its suit of armor, and Ma Kukshuen was unable to hear what it was saying even though he could only see it move its mouth. He frantically looked at the swordsman, who sighed and informed him. "He said that your grandma committed too many sins when she was alive, and this resulted in her soul and spirit becoming as fragile as her body. Thus, your grandma's soul decayed when she died. This small town is also different from the outside world, and it possesses an innate resistance against ghosts and other beings of the yin element. Because of all these reasons, he was unable to find your grandma's remnant soul." Ma Kukshuen's face contorted in fury, and he looked up at the deity and roared, "I don't give a crap what method you use. Hurry up and find my grandma's soul for me." The martial artist's expression changed drastically. He was afraid that Ma Kukshuen would offend the true god who had the surname Yin, and he was just about to speak out to stop the young boy. For some unknown reason, however, the deity in golden armor surprisingly opened its mouth and spoke using the official dialect of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, saying, "It's not that I don't want to, it's simply that I'm unable to." After saying this, the magnificent deity who was shrouded in a golden glow turned to look at the swordsman from True Marshall Mountain. The swordsman took a deep breath before feigning an act of offering incense and bowing 3 times to the deity. Each time he bowed, a wisp of faint golden aura that was as thick as a thread would hover out from his mud pellet acupoint and be breathed in by the deity in golden armor. After completing this ritual, the deity leaped up and transformed into a dazzling column of light that shot into the distance. The swordsman's face was deathly pale, and he immediately pulled over a chair and sat down, slowly exhaling a breath. This was the real reason behind the common saying, "Inviting a god is easy, but farewelling a god is hard." Ma Kukshuen wore a cold expression as he retracted his gaze. He turned around and walked inside the house, sitting down next to the ice-cold corpse of his grandma. He reached over and grabbed her dry and shriveled hand, and he stared intently at her face, remaining silent for a long time. The swordsman removed the tiger talisman from his waist, and it was clear that its luster had become slightly dimmer compared to before. He slowly placed the talisman in his sleeve. After resting for a brief moment, the man stood back up. However, he didn't walk to Ma Kukshuen, and he instead walked over to sit on the doorstep. With his back facing the young boy, he slowly explained, "Your grandma was most likely standing at the door when she was slapped by someone. The force of the slap was immense, and this caused her to fly into the house and crash to the ground, resulting in her death. You might not want to hear what I'm about to say, but you at least deserve to know the truth. The assailant was most likely a cultivator, and they definitely didn't control their power properly. Moreover, your grandma was already feeble to begin with, so the combination of these factors caused her to pass away. Since the assailant was a cultivator, the prime suspect is Chen Ping'an, and that young girl from outside, or the young girl whose cultivation you disturbed on the covered bridge. Perhaps she attacked your grandma as an act of revenge. The probability of the assailant being Chen Ping'an and that young girl from outside is extremely small, while the probability of it being the young girl from the covered bridge is extremely big. You decided to go to the unmarked burial ground to kill Chen Ping'an, and you did this with the intention of being dutiful toward your grandma. You wanted to sever her negative karma with Chen Ping'an. However, you definitely couldn't have imagined that your trip to the burial ground would coincide with someone charging to your house to seek revenge. Ma Kukshuen shakily reached over, and he gently stroked his grandma's cheek with the back of his hand. Her cheek was severely swollen, and it had already become black and blue in color. "So I was the one who caused my grandma to die, is that what you're saying?" Ma Kukshuen asked softly. The swordsman replied, "According to the views of society, yes and no. According to the views of..." Ma Kukshuen immediately cut him off, unwilling to listen to his reasonings any longer. He stood up with a baleful expression, and he spat, I'm not allowed to destroy nations and massacre cities, and I'm not allowed to wantonly kill innocent people either. I'm not allowed to do this, and I'm not allowed to do that. So tell me, am I allowed to seek revenge and kill my enemy?" Before the man could even reply, Ma Kukshuen continued, "If I'm not allowed to do even this, then what's the fucking point of becoming a militarian cultivator? Why don't I act as I please and become a wanton demon instead? Why didn't I accept that Taoist nun's offer at that time and join her whatever sect?" The man hesitated for a moment before replying, "You can go as long as you're able to endure the consequences. Just like today. Also, there are some things that I perhaps didn't explain clearly before. For example, killing people. In fact, there's a different limit for different people, with the number of people you're able to kill definitely different from the number of people I'm able to kill. This is not only because I'm stronger than you and possess a higher cultivation base. One's temperament and mindset are also extremely important. Perhaps I'll kill 100 people, and all of them will be detestable people who deserve death. Meanwhile, you might only kill 2 or 3 people, but there's already someone among them who's innocent and doesn't deserve death." Ma Kukshuen suddenly chuckled and sneered, "Why would I ever ask you about whether I can kill someone or how I should kill someone? Do you think I'll ever need your help? I almost forgot. I'm still not an official disciple of true Martial Mountain yet." He glanced down at his grandma before turning around to face the square table in the main hall. "Hurry up and lead the way," he bellowed in fury. A black cat immediately shot out from under the table, and Ma Kukshuen sprinted after it and left the house. The man didn't pay any heed to this. One had to realize that the nation he originally came from had descended into chaos 150 years ago. Mountains had crumbled, and rivers had been severed, and the 100 years of chaotic battle had resulted in tragedies and miseries that were unsurpassed in the entire Eastern Treasured Vile continent. When a new dynasty finally brought an end to the chaos, only fewer than 800,000 of the initial 10 million households remained. This caused many young children to develop the misconception that the corpses of dead people didn't need to be collected and buried. The swordsman was one of these children. He slowly stood up. Compared to telling Ma Kukshuen that the assailant had already been kicked out of the small town, he was more interested in visiting Master Ruan and asking him a question. He wanted to ask why the circulation of karmic fate was so obvious in this place, even though Buddhism had already been in a relatively weak state in Eastern Treasured Vile continent for 1,000 years. Not only that, but the Buddhists were also the weakest force in this small town. The militarian swordsman followed Ma Kukshuen from a great distance. Even if Ma Kukshuen were an official disciple of true Martial Mountain at this moment, the swordsman still wouldn't interfere too much with his personal affairs and grudges. On the battlefield, people could stick by each other through thick and thin. When it came to cultivation, however, each person would have to take responsibility for their own life and death. Of course, nothing was absolute. For example, the swordsman had stepped forward to save Ma Kukshuen when he had almost been killed by Chen Ping'an. There had been 2 reasons for this. Firstly, the swordsman hoped that a prodigy like Ma Kukshuen wouldn't die too early. He wanted Ma Kukshuen to temper both his talent and temperament in true Martial Mountain, such that he could reach a greater height. At the same time, he also wanted Ma Kukshuen to become one of the representatives of militarianism, such that he could display his power and brilliance in the coming age of turbulence. Secondly, Mr. Qi had personally said that Ma Kukshuen and Chen Ping'an should only go as far as to determine a victor between them. They shouldn't go as far as to kill each other. At that time, the swordsman had thought that Mr. Qi was worried about Chen Ping'an being killed. Only afterward did he realize that this wasn't the case at all. Keeping a large distance between himself and Ma Kukshuen, the swordsman noticed that the young boy's pace was gradually slowing down and becoming more relaxed after his initial burst of hot-headedness. In the end, he looked like an ordinary young boy strolling through the streets. However, this changed when the black cat jumped down from some rooftop and onto his shoulder, before turning around and sprinting away. It was as if the black cat were telling Ma Kukshuen that he had already found the target. Ma Kukshuen started to jog slowly, and his aura changed once again. The spring rain was light, and it simply hastened the footsteps of those on the streets. However, it was still far from compelling them to hide under the eaves. A young man and a young woman in extravagant clothes were currently walking toward the main street from Dragon Riding Alley. Their faces were filled with joy, and it was as if they had both obtained some fated opportunity. However, a youth was soon about to teach them the meaning of disaster and fortune always coming hand in hand. Ma Kukshuen broke into a sprint 50 paces away from the two people, and when he was 20 paces away, he suddenly called out to catch their attention. When the man turned around, Ma Kukshuen ruthlessly threw a punch, not holding back in the least. This was a punch aimed at his head. The young man was sent flying backward onto the street, and he slammed into the ground with a heavy thud. His body convulsed slightly, and he showed no signs of getting back up. Ma Kukshuen landed on both feet after throwing this punch, and he was coincidentally standing right next to the young woman. With a twist of his body, he immediately threw a swinging arm at the woman's neck with his left arm. With a bam, the young cultivator, who was half a head taller than him, was sent crashing into the ground. The woman's head smashed into the muddy ground. Ma Kukshuen raised a foot and stomped on the woman's forehead. He bent over and looked down, gazing at her dazed face as he said, using the official dialect, "I know the assailant isn't the small town anymore. However, this doesn't matter. I can investigate things myself." The beautiful young woman's eyes were bloodshot, and trails of blood were also seeping out from her nose and ears. There was shock and terror on her face as she looked up at the severely tanned young boy. Ma Kukshuen's face was filled with wickedness as he continued, "I, Ma Kukshuen, ruined your mental state during your cultivation, so you naturally have the right to seek revenge in the future. Even if you hack me to death, I'll accept my fate and I won't blame you at all. In fact, even if you fail to kill me, I might still forgive you if I'm in a good mood, and I'll be willing to play around with you a few more times. In my eyes, this is how carefree the world should be." The young woman was presumably a prodigy in her sect, so when had she ever encountered a situation like this before? She sobbed in fright, and it was very likely that she wouldn't even be able to remember Ma Kukshuen's words. She simply begged, "Let me go, please, I beg you. Let me go. Your grandma wasn't killed by me, and I wasn't aware of this matter at all." Ma Kukshuen put more weight on his foot, causing the young woman's head to slowly sink into the muddy ground. "Do you know what I detest most about you people? It's that you people can still remain so dismissive after committing a sin. You people don't feel a shred of guilt or remorse at all, not a single shred." There was a sobbing tone in his voice, and there was more so an intense look of hatred in his eyes. The young woman reached over with great difficulty, grabbing Ma Kukshuen's ankle as she begged, "Please let me go. My grandpa is the commander of Sea Tide Cavalry, and I'm his most adored granddaughter. I can compensate you. I can give you whatever you want." There was a look of pity and imploration in her eyes. Ma Kukshuen wore a fake smile as he mused, "Oh, what a coincidence. I'm the grandson of Ma Lanhua, my grandma." He suddenly raised his foot a little before placing it back down and rubbing it on the young woman's delicate and beautiful face. "Sea Tide Cavalry, was it? Just you wait, I'll definitely play around with you in the future." Ma Kukshuen removed his foot and looked to his left and right. On the left was the swordsman from True Martial Mountain, and he was standing there with his sword strapped to his back. On his right was an elegant young man, and he held an oil paper umbrella in his hand as he stood beside the collapsed and pitiful man and looked at Ma Kukshuen. Ma Kukshuen's instinct told him that the young man with the umbrella was actually waiting for him to kill the young woman. Ma Kukshuen suddenly squatted down. The young woman attempted to escape, yet her neck was instantly held down by the soaked young boy. Only after she stopped moving did he let go of her. He lightly slapped her face again and again as he smiled and said, "Remember this, okay? My name is Ma Kukshuen, and I'll definitely look for you again in the future. And also that person who isn't in the small town anymore. You definitely have to thank him well. Otherwise, the relationship between us wouldn't have been so great." In the end, Ma Kukshuen spat on the young woman's face. He stood up and walked to the swordsman from True Martial Mountain, asking in a low voice, "Who's that person?" "The future mountain master of Lakeview Academy, one of the 72 academies of Confucianism," the swordsman replied calmly. "He's called Kui Mingwang, and his ancestry is especially prominent. He's also come here to retrieve a subjugation treasure, and he's an extremely shrewd and calculating person. You need to be wary of him in the future. If I'm not wrong, he's already got an eye on you." Ma Kukxuan frowned and observed. The feeling that he gives off is very different from the feeling that Mr. Qi gives off. The swordsman couldn't help but chuckle. How many scholars do you think can be like Mr. Qi and adhere to their true selves? He hesitated for a moment before explaining. Everyone in the outside world is spreading the rumor that Mr. Qi's cultivation base has declined and that his mental state has collapsed after his master's reputation was damaged. Thus, he agreed to be banished to this small world. Even though he had to endure the constant erosion from the might of heaven and earth, he can still act wantonly and as he pleases. In my view, however, this isn't necessarily the case. Ma Kukxuan wasn't interested in these matters, and he turned around to look at the elegant young man. Still holding the oil paper umbrella, he was squatting down next to the young girl, and he was most likely speaking gentle words to comfort her. Ma Kukxuan retracted his gaze and walked side by side with the swordsman. His footsteps were heavy as he returned to Apricot Blossom Alley. "Your wounds are fairly significant, so be careful not to leave any hidden problems. Otherwise, your future cultivation will also be affected," the swordsman warned. As Ma Kukxuan wiped the rainwater from his face, he suddenly asked, "What's our small town like in the eyes of those outsiders?" "It's like the creek outside the small town that's filled with all kinds of small fish and large fish," the swordsman replied. "There's knee-deep water, yet there are also deep and bottomless pools. When coming here to train and search for treasures, have any of the outsiders drowned before?" Ma Kukxuan asked. The swordsman smiled and shook his head, replying, "In the past, almost never. Most of them would peacefully obtain treasures, leaving everyone satisfied and happy. However, this time is an exception." In the Yang family's medicine shop, a young girl with a gallant disposition walked briskly inside as she carried a young boy on her back. She looked at a middle-aged shop assistant and asked, "Is Mr. Yang here?" Sensing the young girl's extraordinary aura, the shop assistant didn't dare to offend her, and he said with a nod, "Yes, he just finished sorting some medicine in the backyard. You two are looking for him." "We're acquainted with Old Man Yang, and we want to obtain some medicine from him," Ning Yao replied solemnly. The shop assistant hesitated for a moment before deciding to lead them to the building in the backyard. An old man was lightly tapping the table with his smoking pipe, and there also stood a disheveled man in a distant corner of the room. This disheveled man was none other than Zheng Dafeng, the gatekeeper for the eastern gate of the small town. Perhaps this was a case of everyone having their vanquisher, with Zheng Dafeng not even daring to breathe too heavily in the presence of Old Man Yang. He no longer appeared like a punchable scoundrel. Old Man Yang waved his smoking pipe, and Zheng Dafeng hurriedly walked out of the building, bringing the other shop assistants with him. Old Man Yang looked at the familiar figure on Ning Yao's back. Chen Ping'an's lips were white, and his entire body was trembling. His arms were tightly wrapped around Ning Yao's neck as if his life depended on it. Old Man Yao calmly stood up, with one hand behind his back and one hand holding his smoking pipe as he walked up to Ning Yao. He looked Chen Ping'an in the eyes and said in a hoarse voice, "How many times have I told you? The cheaper your life and the lesser your fortune, the more you have to cherish your life and cherish your fortune. So what do? Every time you encounter a minor setback, you push yourself until you're on the brink of death. Since you like doing this so much, why didn't you follow after your mother at that time? Wouldn't that save you the trouble?" Old Man Yao was correct. When he was alive, he always liked to say that a person's fate could be seen when they were only 3 years old. And you were one who wouldn't live for long. That being the case, teaching you the best skills and most profound arts would naturally be a waste. You'll still be 6 feet under very soon, after all. Ning Yao was wide-eyed with shock. In her imagination, Old Man Yang should have been a kindly and benevolent old man who always wore an amiable smile. Who knew that he would be such a bitter and vitriolic old man? "It hurts a lot," the old man sneered. Chen Ping'an nodded softly. He was already unable to speak. When he had woken up on Ning Yao's back, he had already started to feel some pain, most likely because the effects of the medicine had already worn off. However, Chen Ping'an had felt like he could still endure it for a little while. When they reached the covered bridge, though, he knew that he wouldn't be able to endure his wounds for much longer. Thus, Ning Yao hadn't even had the time to retrieve her saber by the creek, and she had immediately carried him and rushed over to the Yang family's medicine shop. The old man chuckled and said, "It hurts, huh? Then obediently endure it." He then glanced at Ning Yao and snapped, "Let him sit on the bench by himself." "Being carried by a young girl, don't you find this embarrassing?" the old man mumbled. Ning Yao forcefully suppressed her anger as she carefully placed Chen Ping'an down on the long bench. However, Chen Ping'an immediately swayed and looked like collapsing when she let go of him. Ning Yao was just about to reach over and help him. However, even though Chen Ping'an couldn't speak, he still gestured with his eyes that he didn't need her help. The old man took a puff from his smoking pipe before observing Chen Ping'an's body and aura. He clicked his tongue in wonder and remarked, "You genuinely live up to your name as an impoverished young boy. But yes, you did indeed manage to keep your conscience clear, huh?" The old man was completely indifferent to Chen Ping'an's bone-piercing pain, and he scolded, "What kind of fortunate fate does Liu Xianyang have? And what kind of destitute fate do you have? After so many years, are you still not aware of this? Him dying once is almost enough misfortune for you to die 10 times over. Do you understand?" Ning Yao was truly unable to endure the old man's cruel words, and she asked solemnly, "Mr. Yang, can you please give Chen Ping'an some painkillers first?" The hunched old man shot a sideways glance at Ning Yao. "He's your man?" he asked calmly. Ning Yao replied with an angry glare. The old man ignored her, and he turned around to look at Chen Ping'an. As if in his own world, he fell into deep thought. In the end, he pursed his lips and sighed. He used his old smoking pipe to tap Chen Ping'an once on the shoulders and twice each on his arms and legs. Suddenly, Chen Ping'an shifted to a position where he lay on his side, with his elbow under his head as he rested on the bench. "Sleep," the old man commanded. Chen Ping'an instantly shut his eyes and fell asleep, with his snores as loud as rumbling thunder.